Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us today for On Trauma Recovery and Reclaiming Yourself. I'm Pele, the Public Events Specialist for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We may be joining from different places all over the world, and as a representative of CIIS, I want to begin by acknowledging our debt and gratitude to the Ramaytu Ohlone, who are the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS campus is located on the traditional unceded lands of the Ramaytu Ohlone, which they call Yalamu. In the Ramaytu Ohlone language, Yalamu identifies both the people and the territory. This acknowledgement is just a single small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with Indigenous tribes and organizations in our community, and does not begin to acknowledge all of the native lands, languages, and territories where you all are right now, or where you live and work every day. I invite you to take a moment now to acknowledge the land where you reside and to commit to learn more about the Native communities near you and to support their work. If it feels right for you to share in the chat, please do. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource. Before we begin, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A after the conversation tonight. Please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. Our presenters will pull questions from that form after the event, and we will try to get to as many as we can. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Chat will be enabled during this event. Please note that it is not being moderated, and our presenters cannot see the chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event. If you choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn the chat off at any time, and we encourage you to do so if you find that it is negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you're having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing the page. And then if you still have issues, we suggest that you adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now let me introduce our presenters, Dr. Thema Bryant and Rachel Bryant, and we'll get right to the conversation. Rachel Bryant, MA, is an educator, leader, and healer with more than 2 decades of experience in public and community mental health. She currently serves as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at California Institute of Integral Studies, where she has helped teach, mentor, and launch the careers of hundreds of emerging mental health clinicians from diverse backgrounds. Rachel is dedicated to working alongside others to heal the soul wounds of poverty, violence, and addiction in our communities, and believes in the innate wisdom and intelligence of all people to heal themselves and others. She serves as a board member of the Rafiki Coalition for Health and Wellness, which provides culturally responsive health and wellness services to San Francisco's Black communities, and as a core member of the Healing Clinic Collective, which promotes ancestral ways of healing and healthcare for traumatized populations in the Bay Area and beyond. Dr. Thema Bryant is a clinical psychologist and the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association. She's also a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University and is an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Dr. Bryant earned her doctorate from Duke University and completed her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. She's also the author of Homecoming and raises awareness about mental health issues on the Homecoming podcast and her social media platforms. Now let me turn it over to Rachel and Dr. Thema.
Hi, Dr. Thema. Welcome to this public program. Welcome everyone who's joined us tonight. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this conversation. How are you tonight?
Thank you. I am wonderful. I'm excited that we're cousins with the same last name and that we have our blue on for this healing conversation. So I'm grateful and excited.
Well, since you mentioned that, cousins, I think it's a good way to start to tell us who your people are. Where are you from? Who are your people?
Yes,
And maybe we are
wonderful.
cousins. My
That's
family's
right.
from Arkansas. My Bryant family's from Arkansas.
Okay,
So what about you?
We're South Carolina.
Okay.
But it's still possible. We go back far enough. I am Dr. Thema Bryant, and I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, on my father's side, we are the Bryants, and my mom's side, the Williams. But if we go back far enough, thanks to our DNA testing, I come from the Mende people of Sierra Leone, and I am grateful for ancestors who paved the way for us to be here, both known and unknown, recognized and unrecognized. There is the African saying, I am because we are. And so knowing that it's because people before me sacrificed and labored and prayed and dreamed and reimagined, that I'm able to be here. I live in Los Angeles, and I am the child and grandchild of griots, of ministers, of educators, of community leaders, of artists. And all of that runs in me and is alive in me. And I'm happy to say it continues on in my two children, who are Ife and Ayo, and those names mean love and joy.
Yes.
So I am feeling full in life, and holding both ancestors and descendants at the same time.
Now that's how you introduce yourself. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about that. It's so evident the way that the ancestors are working through you on behalf of all of us, on behalf of humanity. We're here to talk about your latest book, Take Back Your Life from Stress and Trauma. It's Reclaim Yourself, the Homecoming Workbook. Yes.
Yes,
I have
yes.
been looking forward to it. And my impression of reading this book is that everything you just said comes through on every page. You
Yes.
are a minister and a psychologist and a daughter and a mother and a healer and someone who's been healed.
Yes.
And you write with such tenderness.
Mhm.
It almost feels like it's a love letter, maybe to yourself first before you gave it to us. And so and you also position yourself in this book. Like you also
Yeah.
are really literally in this book. You introduce yourself, not quite the same way you did with us, but you introduce yourself. So what inspired you to write with that level of intimacy and authenticity? Because that's not the way I know you're training as a psychologist. I'm not sure about a minister, but
Yeah.
you get propped up on these roles, you get these titles, you get these positions, but there's an intimacy to this book and a wholeness. Yeah. So what inspired you to bring yourself
Yeah.
right into this writing?
Thank you so much for acknowledging that, seeing that, hearing that in the tone. And it is intentional. I have books before. So Reclaim Yourself is the workbook inspired by the book Homecoming. Homecoming came out in 2022. Yes, that's the book, Reclaim Yourself. And while I have several books before these, most of those books are more academic. So they're textbooks, and as you're saying, like there's this kind of technical or scientific way that you write and kind of making your scientific argument and all of your citations, because you can't say something unless someone said it first. So these kind of rules and restrictions. And I really was in a point in my life, both personally and professionally, of recognizing, one, that knowledge is power, and two, wanting to give the information to people in a way that they can use it. So the point is not like, can I write this in a way that sounds smart, right? That it is, I want to land on the target, and the target is our heart, and to land in such a way that when people read it, they understand it and they feel it and they can apply it. Because it doesn't make sense for it to be feel good and then we remain as we are. And so that, and I love you saying it being first a love letter to myself, because it's for people who have faced stress and trauma, and I have faced stress and trauma. So it's not just a hypothetical guess at what people might need to know, but it's based on both my lived experience, but also, these decades of working with people, helping people to reclaim themselves. And all of that is rooted in love. So I would say that is in it, and guiding it is a love for humanity, and a hope for us to be able to get to the truth of ourselves, and not to remain disconnected.
We'll get into that some more. I definitely want to talk about that part of the book about disconnection. This book, you call it a truth telling. I'm going to read a quote because it struck me. It's like on one of the first pages. This is not a pep talk. This is truth telling. So why do you say that? And what is the truth? Whose truth?
Right. Yes. So a pep talk can feel very empty. Usually a pep talk is motivational to get you to do something or to convince you to believe something. And like, I don't have an agenda. As you said, like, whose truth? It should be your own truth, right? That's the piece with therapy, is it's not for the therapist to tell you what you should do, or to decide for you. It is to have us each confront the truth of our own souls, and then we know what to do. And often what I've discovered is we know what to do, but we're afraid, or we're lacking support, or we don't know the steps of how to get from where I am to where I want to be. And so one of the first steps in reclaiming yourself or coming home to yourself is to tell yourself the truth. And so sometimes it's not just that we lie to other people, we can lie to ourselves. What's the biggest lie probably that we say? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Right? We don't even think about it. And it's like, are you? That would be remarkable to be fine with everything that is happening, So for us, we cannot heal wounds we won't acknowledge. And so it's a beautiful thing to be able to tell ourselves the truth of our circumstance, because then we're in a place to say, okay, now what? That is the truth. And so now what?
Thank you. It's amazing to me how much that line, I'm fine, I'm good, how much that walks.
Right.
Goes unquestioned, right? And it
Yes.
really doesn't matter if someone else, it would be nice if your community and the people that love you go a little bit deeper, like, really?
Right.
But
Yes.
it's more important that we do that for ourselves. And so in order to come home, that means you've left home.
Yes.
And you describe it as, when did you lose yourself? And so talk a little bit about what it means to come home and to have left home so that you can come back home. What do you mean by, what is home?
Yes.
What is
Yes.
home?
So home is authenticity. Home is being real. Home is true. And why did we leave home, or what made us disconnect from the truth of ourselves? Many different circumstances. One, we get the message very early on of what we need to do or say, or how we need to present ourselves to be liked, to be loved, to be chosen, to be thought highly of, And so those messages not only come from your family, it comes from your peer group, it comes from teachers, it comes from the mass media. And so we come to believe things about ourselves. But one of my dear sister friends, Asia, who's a poet, has a poem that says, "Who lied?" Right? Who told you you weren't good enough? Who told you there was a problem with your nose or with your hair? Who told you that your body was misshaped? Who told you that your voice was wrong? Who told you that the way you think about things is not acceptable? And so it starts so early, And I remember my daughter, who's now in college, when she was in preschool, she wanted to wear her hair out, and it was this big, cute, curly afro, and she had like these yellow bows. And when I picked her up at the end of the day, she was very upset because one of the boys had said her hair looked funny. She didn't wear her hair out like that. That was preschool. She didn't wear it out again until like 8th grade.
Wow.
Right? From one
Wow.
person, like one person said, this is unacceptable. And so, we think back, what are the various times that we were taught we were unacceptable and the ways we changed ourselves in order to be either with this friendship group or romantically, or even in a job setting. And so those are kind of the everyday ways we can lose sight of ourselves. And then there are the larger ways, which are experiences of trauma. Right. So if we experience abandonment, physical abuse, verbal, sexual abuse, I would say the trauma of poverty and oppression, all of those, we ultimately, I won't say all, well, ultimately we want to be safe. And so we learn to adjust and modify ourselves in the hopes of being safer.
Yeah. I just want to breathe that whole piece in, and I can't even quantify the number of messages I've received in my life, or that anyone has received in their life, that you're not good enough, that you don't fit the mold, the expectation. A lot of us walk around like something's wrong with us.
Yes.
It can be so deep until someone pushes that button, like the one that was pushed in your daughter.
Right.
So we're vulnerable.
Right.
We're walking around in the world pretty vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And even so part of it can also be like representation. We say representation matters. Like if you have a dream of becoming something and you have never seen someone who looks like you in that place, that can also send a message. So it's not only what people have said to you, but it's also the invisibility, the erasure, the assumption of like, you don't belong here. Right.
Yes.
So we call that, whether it's covert or overt, right? Subtle or blatant stereotype, stigma, discrimination, not only around race and ethnicity, but gender, sexuality, disability, migration status, religion. And so we can get boxed in and end up living in reaction to other people's assumptions, which is like a full-time job. And that's not free. So to reclaim myself is not to center what other people think of me, and I don't say that in a naive sense. I know we are affected by other people's opinions about us, but that I retain the right to define myself. And I reclaim it. I reclaim it.
Okay. Yes. Yes. It's always the people that you love the most too that can push that button, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Right.
it seems like you may always be doing the dance of homecoming in your
Yes.
life and recommitting to being at home in yourself. Yes.
Right. It's an ongoing process. I love that you said that, because we give people's opinions more weight in different circumstances, sometimes more weight or value from family. So, people can spend their lives longing for the approval of certain people, right? Because you think like, if this person doesn't love me, no one will. Or this person must know me more than anyone else. Or if they say that I'm stupid, it must be true. If they say I'm ugly, it must be true. And so proximity, family, also people with status or authority, their opinions can weigh heavy when we talk about like power dynamics. And so, even thinking about within ourselves, whose opinions is it easy for you to shake off, and who's like resonate, like years later, you still hear what they said, or you still feel that, or part of you even believes it.
Yes, yes. This is a workbook that you have written, and I went through it. I think you should take your time with this workbook, right? So I didn't do all of the exercises, but it makes you work, but in a good way, because you also incorporate creative expressive arts sort of exercises and somatic exercises and
Mhm.
spiritual wisdom. The thing that I love the most, and I don't know that I've seen this much variety of Indigenous wisdom in any one book, self-help workbook. If it's okay that I call this a self-help
Yes,
book.
yes.
Every chapter ended with Indigenous wisdom, and like
Mhm.
from around the globe, there
Mhm.
was Japanese Indigenous wisdom and African and Chicanx, and
Yes,
I wrote down a Jewish and stuff
yes.
from Islam. Like there was so much Indigenous
Mhm.
wisdom, and I don't think I've seen a collection like that as I've been contemplating my own beliefs
Mhm.
in a workbook, like thinking through my own life progress, to just be reaffirmed with that wisdom.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for naming that. I believe it's so important for mental health professionals to have more humility. That, as a discipline, as a field, we're relatively young. So I think it's like arrogant to say if someone hasn't done psychotherapy, they've done no work on themselves. And I'm an advocate of
Yes,
therapy. I provide therapy. I'm in therapy. And at the same time, there are many, many pathways of
yes,
healing. And in a lot of places in the world, therapy is not an option. So to assume that that means people are not whole is, it's just arrogant. So it was important for me to acknowledge the various contributions that exist, as you named, from around the world, because often what happens is, scientists or scholars or mental health folks will gather information, say, extract it from a culture, and then say, like, I founded it, right? Like I'll say, like, I created this in 2024. Meanwhile, people have been doing this for generations.
yes.
So it's another way of, say, of truth telling, and also so that our young people who are growing up with various identities don't believe that healing, wholeness, and wellness is something separate from who they are.
Mhm.
I love in the Chicano affirmative psychotherapy, their institute, they talk about, therapy. It is an indigenous healing form because it's relational. It's like you go and seek out the elders and
Yes.
talk about whatever your issues are, and they will support you through it. And so, it's the collective, it's that we're interrelated, it's showing up for each other instead of just this idea that this is just some totally foreign concept to who we are.
Mm-hmm. Who were your Indigenous teachers? Where'd you get all this wisdom
Ah,
from?
thank you. So I am so grateful to have been raised by Afrocentric parents, and they gave this wisdom to my brother and I in multiple ways. A big part of it was exposure, but I'll start even with the names. And so my name Thema means queen, and my middle name Simone is after the African American singer Nina Simone, who's a fire starter and a justice bringer. And my brother, Jamal's name means beautiful spirit. So I would say starting with the naming, but then also in our community, my father was a pastor, and really practiced what we would call liberation theology, which, is in part one, that marginalized people, minoritized people are not an afterthought of God. Right? Some people try to say, like, oh, like not loved or not sacred or not chosen, or like, that God didn't have us in mind, versus, like so beloved,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are so, so beloved. And, um, and that it's not just about afterlife, but like a liberation theology means our church was open all week long because we had like a feeding program and an AA degree program, and all of the different components of holistic wellness, of wanting us to be free on earth, not just afterlife.
Yes.
And so that taught me, and then, you know, we would always be a part of like Kwanzaa programming. And then I actually had the opportunity to live in Liberia, West Africa, for 2 years of high school. And that was life-changing because I, you know, like to tell people this is like pre-Obama, where people would say you could be anything you want to be, but you didn't really see it. And so to go to a place as a teenager at 14, to go somewhere and everyone in a place of authority, in a position of authority, looked like me, like the head of the bank, the head of the school, the president of the university, every newscaster. So it opened up, you know, my imagination of what is possible. Before that, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. And so to get, and often I will say, grew up with those stereotypes about Africa, where what gets presented. Even when I told people I was moving there, they were like, "What are you going to eat? Everyone is starving, or everyone is sick, or, you know, all of this negativity." And so to go there and see the beauty of it, the genius of it, the cultural richness, that allowed me when I started college to really have a greater sense of myself and a greater sense of like global issues beyond my block, right? And so, yeah, those pieces really, really taught me well.
Now that was a homecoming that you just described right
That
there.
was a
Right?
homecoming.
That was
That
a
was.
homecoming.
Yes.
Yes.
And I can tell you, you know, so there are different domains of self-esteem. So you can feel good about yourself maybe as a writer, but not feel good about yourself in terms of making friends. Or you can feel very confident in yourself in math, but not confident in sports. Okay, so there are different domains. And I was one of those kids growing up that like always got A's. So I had confidence about my ability to figure things out or to do whatever work was assigned. But growing up in Baltimore, there was definitely what we would call internalized racism that manifests as colorism. And so even though I was at a predominantly Black public school, there was a lot of teasing around complexion, around my features. Like it was an insult to say you look like an African. You know, this is because of that brainwashing that must be negative. So it was so powerful for me to, as a teen girl, to move to a place. I had the same face, the same features, and literally got off the plane and was praised. Like I had never experienced that before, right? That I went from ridicule to celebrated. And so that was so, we talk about homecoming, that was so healing for me to see beyond the narrow Eurocentric beauty myths, to be able to see, you know, not only the beauty in myself, but the beauty in all people. I remember when I started practicing, I had a Chinese American client who was dealing with colorism as well. Because at first I just thought it was something in the Black community, but of course learned that it's global. And, you know, her struggling to see the beauty in herself. And I was so glad I did that inner work, because in one session, she asked me, "Well, Dr. Bryant, do you think you're beautiful?" And it was so important that as we've said, that I could tell my truth, that yes, I do. And I know it wasn't easy. Like you're having to push past all of these messages that are trying to convince you of a lie so that you can see the glory that you are, right? And as you said, that's ongoing. You have to perpetually do that, because in a consistent way, you're getting these other messages.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so inspired by that. And I don't think it's ever too late to maybe immerse yourself in your ancestral culture, like in that land, in that place where you're celebrated.
Yes.
You know, in a few ways, you already started to answer a really important question I wanted to ask you. And so, but still want to ask it directly.
Yeah.
And so you talk about in your writing the need to decolonize therapy, and that that's more clear to me, and maybe a lot of our listeners, and you describe some of it in the book, like just including the ancestral wisdom and even in what you've shared already. My question was, do we also need to decolonize ministry? You're a psychologist
Yes.
and a minister. And so you started describing that, but I'd really like for you to speak more
Yes,
directly to both of those, because
that's right.
they're essentially both spiritual care.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
it's psychology is the soul, right? And
right,
so is
right.
ministry. So
Yeah.
how and why do we need to decolonize both of
hmm
those healing
Yes.
modalities?
Yes, thank you so much. And definitely, people often frame it as decolonizing theology, but it's ministry, it's all of those things, our sacred
Uh-huh.
spaces. And I'll just step back for a minute for those who aren't familiar with the terminology first. And so we think about colonization, right? What does colonization do? It separates, it extracts, it attempts to dehumanize. Um, it creates hierarchy, it oppresses, it steals. And so then to decolonize is considered a reclamation, right? Being able to reclaim truth, reclaiming land, reclaiming rights, reclaiming Indigenous ways, reclaiming yourself, right? And so then to decolonize sacred spaces, we would have to think about what are the ways in which they've been colonized, right? So one of them can be as simple as when we think about music, right? And I love all forms of music, but when we let kind of a racial hierarchy exist in that sacred space, then people would say more classical music is more sacred or sounds holier than like drums and guitars, right? So it's like who says, who says that in sacred space that we must always be silent, and in our tradition in Black churches, they have like a lot of call and response. And so, if the minister says something, to be able to say amen, or something they've taken out of a lot of churches is they used to have a testimony service where
Mm-hmm.
people would get up and talk about the difficulties and challenges that they've overcome with God's help. And so, interestingly, in liberation theology, which was coined by a Latin American psychologist, one of the healing formats is called testimonios. So it's telling our story. And we think about us often in sacred spaces or religious spaces in the present being so afraid of being judged and condemned that we censor our story, that we lie, that we dilute ourselves, that we pretend to be perfect, that we pretend to have never had a past or, never taken some detours. And so to decolonize our faith, our ministry, our theology, is to worship in a way that connects with us culturally, to not feel like I have to adopt a different culture to be close to God. It is to be able to be unashamed, to be present. And also, I would say, to be able to see the divine, however you visualize that, to be able to see the divine in your image, right? So in sacred text, it says, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. So can you picture God in yourself? It was so funny growing up at a Black church in Baltimore. We had this huge mural on the wall, and one of my friends from school who was white spent the night at my house. And so on a Saturday night, so on Sunday, we got up and went to church. And we walked in, and there's like the huge mural with the Black Jesus. And she said, "Who's that?" And I had been so in this Afrocentric space. I'm like, "You don't know who Jesus is?" Like, you've never seen Jesus. So it's so funny how disturbed some people get. I was doing a presentation at a seminary, I won't say which one, but I was showing God as Asian, as a woman, as Black, and people get very flustered, if it is anything but a white man. And, we have to like decolonize like, that the sacred can only be in your image and likeness, right? That you can't even imagine that any other embodiment could be sacred. So, yeah.
You take me back. I went to that similar church in Oakland, St. Columba Church. We had kente cloth and drums and guitars, sang Bill Withers songs instead of like,
Yes.
like religious songs.
I love it.
So I loved it too. Yes, yes. We're jumping ahead a little bit in the book. We're jumping ahead a little bit in the book because I want to go deeper into this idea of our spirituality and what is sacred. And you talk about how important spirituality is and the difference between what you just said about feeling like you're loved by God, a positive sort of reinforcement from your spirituality, whatever that might be, whatever form, or internalizing sort of the anger or the shame that sometimes organized religion or forms of worship might put on you. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
Because I think
absolutely.
it can be both ways.
That's right.
People,
And
they find community and healing, and they find
right.
hurt, depending on your
Yes,
identities,
that's so true. It's so true. And it's really important for each of us to recognize the range of experiences people have had with sacred spaces.
Yes.
And often we can only imagine that people have had our experience, which, is just a slice of the pie. So there are people for whom it has really saved their lives, both I would say the belief or faith, I would say for trauma survivors, sometimes we'll say things like, even though I didn't get justice on earth, I know ultimately this person is going to have to answer for what they did to me. And that gives them some sense of relief. For other people, that sense of support. For some people, it's a protective factor against engaging in unhealthy behaviors because they feel that would like dishonor their sacred commitments. And so for some people, it's love, it's hope, it's community, it's like all of these great things. And they can't imagine why people would not want it, right? And then there are people who have experienced what we call either religious abuse or church hurt, who have been condemned, violated, controlled. We talk about like places that are more cultish, taking their money, sexual abuse, all of these things, or even if it wasn't like a physical or sexual or financial abuse, were put in such a place of shame and condemnation where they're like, this is terrible, and I want to help everybody to reject it. So these are very different experiences, and we have to learn how to hear each other and to make room to hold in our heart the spaciousness or the truth, which is both of those things can be true at the same time, And so for some people, this is what helps them to not only get through, but maybe even to thrive. And then for other people, they're like, it was so harmful, I had to get out of there. And that's why we say the range of sacred experiences. So some people will say, like, I will find the sacred in the arts or in nature or in these other spiritual communities. I will say, whenever you have a group of people, you're going to have issues, right? Because some people will say, I'm leaving formal religion, and then they got into a yoga group, and then there was abuse in the yoga group. So that is one of the challenges of humanity, right? Is sometimes, well, all the time, people don't live up to the fullness of the ideals or the values. But you want to be in a community where at least that people are striving, where there's accountability, where especially those in leadership are being intentional about trying to protect the space.
Thank you for that affirmation of the range of experiences. And yeah, sometimes you step away and you come back different, into a different
Mm-hmm.
community as you just
Yes.
described, and
Yeah.
you find the sacred in other places. This
Right.
conversation is sacred. This circle of
Yes.
people, we can't even see your faces
Right.
right now, but we know you're there. This is
Beautiful.
sacred space that we're
Mm.
co-creating, and we'll be getting to your questions. I hope you're sending some of them in. And I would also encourage you to maybe grab a something to write with right now if you don't
Mhm.
already have it, because at some point as I was reading your book, I realized that the reader also becomes the writer.
Yes. Yes, I
And
love
that's
that.
really powerful. Like
Hmm.
storytelling or testifying
Yeah.
or just journaling is a really powerful healing tool. And
Hmm.
that once you go through that process, whether it's in writing or even verbally, like in testifying, like it becomes a healing tool that you can use over and over again to help other people. So I'm wondering if we're ready maybe to do a little bit of the exercises. And it's hard
Yeah.
to choose because there's the writing pieces, and the questions are so deep but accessible, I will say
Mm-hmm.
too. So you choose. And
Yes.
some of my favorites are also where you have the writer consider what color is that
Hmm.
feeling that's coming through, like
Yes.
what you're writing, what shape
Hmm.
is it taking. So uh,
Hmm.
thank you for that. And yes,
Yeah.
could you take us through one
Sure.
of the
Sure.
exercises in the book?
Yes, I would love to. So there's a chapter on breakups and divorce.
Oh yeah.
And that's an important one in terms of our healing. Interestingly, as you named with me being a minister, I have not only provided premarital counseling, but officiated weddings. And so, a part of weddings, a part of the formal vow, the traditional vows, it says, I vow to or I promise to, be faithful in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer. And so, what I invite us to do, because so many people idealize that and are waiting for that promise from another, and for us to start with vows to ourselves, right? Do I vow to love myself with my imperfections? Do I vow to love myself when I am chosen and when I am rejected? Do I vow to love myself when I am winning and when it feels like I have failed? Um, and even in terms of our aging, do I still choose me? Right. And so I would invite people, whether in the chat or on your phone or on a sheet of paper, to write some vows to yourself. What do you promise? Do you promise to choose yourself even when what happens? Right? Uh, Across seasons, across times. Um, Across finances. Sometimes we're so pleased with ourselves when our money is right. And when the money's not right, we're mad at ourselves or beating ourselves up. Um, when we have it all together, we can feel easier to love. And what happens when it's not just what everybody else did? Maybe I dropped the ball. Maybe I self-sabotage. Maybe I went back to an old habit, an old pattern. And so, how will I treat myself? How will I delight in myself? How will I love myself? So, and it's also a way of helping people to recenter themselves because often after a breakup, there's a lot of outward focus, either focused on that other person or focused on who is going to replace that other person. And we haven't sat with the truth of us, right?
Mm.
Because once I sit with and heal myself, then things will shift going forward, right? Like when I really loved me, I choose differently. I have different boundaries. I have different requirements, and I show up differently. Yes. And so, uh, yes, write some vows to yourself. And then as you're thinking about those vows, I will take us through a little embodiment. So it is a lot of stress we hold in our bodies. And I invite you to even think about, where do you hold your stress? Mine is often like here and in my lower back. Some of us it's in the jaw. Some people keep the kind of like wrinkled forehead. Some people, the shoulders are up, in the belly, And so we think about, when I reclaim myself, that I invite ease into my body. And so I will take us through some breath, and I want you to know all of this is invitational. So that means it's not mandatory. I'm a trauma survivor, and a part of healing trauma is getting to have body sovereignty, to get to choose, right? So just because someone says take a breath, you don't have to. You decide if you want to. So you're invited to, and you can decide for yourself. So one self-compassion hold, we call it, is one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. And you could just inhale in through the nose and exhale out through the mouth. And the hand that's on the belly, you can lift up to your forehead, inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through the mouth. And the last one, you can embrace yourself, hug yourself, inhaling in through the nose, exhaling out through your mouth. And if it aligns with you, you can just say out loud, I choose me.
I choose you.
Beautiful. It's a good choice. It's a good choice.
She's never left me.
That's it.
Well, externally.
Right, right.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
yes. Thank you for doing that.
Mhm.
I think I'm going to make myself a nice dinner and do something special for myself
Uh,
and write my vows out
I
with a
love
lot more
that.
intention than
Yes.
this moment allowed. But that was a
Yeah.
great exercise. I don't remember seeing that one in the book, but I
Mhm.
like it. You do touch on things. So the other thing is that you story tell within the book. You give
Mhm.
some real examples at the
Yeah.
beginning of the chapter of
Mhm.
like some real clients or
Right.
friends, or maybe
Yeah.
even your own story and pseudonym,
Mhm. Yeah.
about things that we go through in life. And I could really relate to that. Again, the workbook is so relatable because there is that storytelling, because there is that drawing on Indigenous wisdom. And I wondered if there was something, well, what has been the efficacy and the feedback that you've heard from people who've used the
Mhm.
workbook? And has
Mhm.
anything surprised you, or have they taught you something more by using
Yeah.
this workbook? Like, what has
So
emerged?
one, people love the stories, as you're
Yes,
naming, because I think, like, if we write in the abstract, it's like, self-esteem is this,
right.
depression is this. But to see it in action, one, it helps people to see themselves, because they can either often relate themselves, or they know someone it reminds them of, and so it helps them to understand or have more compassion
Oh,
for
yes.
how that person may be feeling. Um, I will say, one of the things that's been striking to me is someone who said, wow, you didn't waste any time. Like, you put us to work right away.
It's true.
So
Right.
it's one of those where sometimes you may think you're asking a light question, but it forces us to think. I think one of the first questions I ask is, what is it you want to reclaim? What drew you to the title? And sometimes that is not even in our awareness. We just say, oh, that sounds interesting. But it's like there's a reason. Maybe you notice something, or you feel something might be missing, even a part of yourself. Um, so it is, I'll say, the growing pains of exploration, but then also people's enthusiasm for doing the work. And what people have said to me is what you said, which is, it's not to be done quickly, right? You don't want
Yeah.
to just like grab a pen and like, I'm going to finish this book tonight. You know, like you have to, like sit with it. Sit with it. And if you have people in your life you trust, talk to them about it, to deepen it, figure out how you might apply it. Like I even love you saying tonight, like make it into a ritual, have a meal, light a candle, put on some music, write your vows. So yeah, give yourself to the process instead of it just being something to check off a to-do list.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Something else though is funny to me is that I was like, it's some of these chapters seem like you wrote this during the pandemic because there's two sections that a lot of this happened during the pandemic. There was some breakups, which we just talked about,
Yeah.
but there was also people who reevaluated their work situation. And there is a whole chapter on that. And if you don't
Toxic.
mind,
Yes.
I actually, this piece is so well written. And if you see yourself in what I'm about to just read a couple of sentences, unless you want to read it, it's
Oh, you
page
can.
141 in the book. So I'll just go there. May you choose yourself over the money, title, status, reputation, prestige, and institution every time. Indigeneity maintains the core value of relationship over materialism. Your relationship with yourself, with nature, with your creator, with your ancestors, and with your family and community are most important. When we talk about relationships, people often skip themselves. Your relationship with yourself is an intentional honoring, protecting, loving of your physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, social, cultural self. Say it again. May you make decisions that honor the sacredness of you. When you're making decisions about work, may you put your labor in its proper perspective. You are more than your job, title, salary, years of service. You are a living soul who is worthy of care.
Mm.
That was so beautiful to me.
I'm like, thank you for reading that. It felt good to hear it.
And I'm not, even if you're in love with the work that you're doing and you're not at that place, it's still an affirmation that you get
Yeah.
up every day and exchange your energy and spend more of
Mhm.
your time sometimes there with your family and friends.
Yeah.
And so if it's not affirming you, if that relationship is not healthy,
Mhm.
it's time to do this section of the workbook.
Yes. And
Yes, thank
I
you.
love your insight with it. The book this is based on, Homecoming, was written during the pandemic. And so
Yes.
those chapters came out of that. And then the workbook kind of continues that conversation. But this culture can be so toxic, this society that presses for perpetual productivity and busyness, so that our work is somehow equated with our worthiness, right? So to recognize the ways in which we are defining ourselves, it is very problematic and unhealthy. And it also, a lot of times we prioritize endurance and perseverance in spaces that are unacceptable, right? We're just like, the work is unfulfilling. The coworkers treat me terribly. The supervisor doesn't respect me, but I've been there 7 years. So I'm, it's like, what is the priority? And so if I reclaim my health, if I reclaim my peace, there are going to be some changes I have to make. So because I want to be well, because I want to live well, then I have to be honest about, is this well for me? Is this good for me? Is this destroying me? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I tell, when I give this part of it away, when you're in a toxic place, the decision is it you need to plan for your departure. So that may either be looking for another job, or you decide to be an entrepreneur and launch your own thing. Or if you are committed to staying, If they are not changing, then something within you has to change so they don't continue to kill you, right? If I keep waiting for my supervisor to promote me and like that's not going to happen, then I have to stop setting myself up for disappointment or frustration and approach the work differently. Yeah.
I think there's often two sides to that story too. I think toxic environments, work or otherwise, relationships, sometimes we're the toxicity and blaming everybody
Yes.
else is like the
Yes.
defense mechanism. So I
That's
want to
right.
shift and talk about emotional intelligence, which is also something that you talk about in the book. You say emotional intelligence is the capacity to recognize and to regulate your feelings and to relate to others in a way that demonstrates a sensitivity to their feelings, enabling you to maintain healthy relationships. Where do you learn emotional intelligence besides the school of hard knocks, right?
Right, right.
And besides like a lot of trial and error, I don't think that this culture and oftentimes even our families teach us emotional intelligence. So
Yes. Well, I'm going to make a connection between this question and the prior question. Is perfect around emotional intelligence and then jobs and like, am I the toxic one? Right.
Yeah.
So with emotional intelligence, there can be, depending on how you define it, various components, but usually four major components. And that is my ability to recognize or be aware of my own emotional state. Right. So being honest with myself about how do I feel? And then second one, how do I regulate and express my feelings? So, it's fine for me to be in touch with how I feel, but like, am I being destructive about it? Am I suppressing it? What am I doing with it? The third is my ability to perceive other people's emotional state, right? Instead of assuming that everyone feels what I feel, which will mess you up because it's just not true. People are you could be in the same room and people are having a very different experience. And then the last one is my ability to create and maintain relationships with people with our various and sometimes differing emotional states, right? So the example that came to mind for me is there was I did a women's group in South Los Angeles for a number of years. And a woman came in and she was very upset. And she was sharing that on her job, she had been working hard for this promotion. And she was upset she didn't get it. But then what she went on to describe is even before not getting it, she didn't like her boss. And so she would never speak to the boss. And she would hate when the boss would kind of come over to her cubicle and say something to her. She would be upset. And she kept to herself, kept her head down, and just tried to work hard. So one, I want to tell people, most jobs are not a meritocracy, meaning hard work alone is not going to get the promotion. A big part is relational, right? So she already made it clear she didn't like this lady. She never spoke to this lady. And then she said, when she found out she didn't get the promotion, she goes to speak with the supervisor and ask, why didn't she get it? And the woman said, you need to work on your emotional intelligence. And the woman says to me, she made this up, meaning like she had never heard the term before, so she didn't know it was a real thing, right? But everything she's describing about how she moves around that workplace lets me know like there's no emotional intel. Like you cannot be hostile toward the person and believe they're going to promote you. It's not going to work, right? So it is important for us to be able to see ourselves, to be aware of ourselves. And this doesn't mean to blame and shame yourself for everything. Like we have to let everything carry its own weight, right? So there are people who are problematic. There are systems and structures that are problematic. Isms and oppression is problematic. And with all of that, I also have to take stock of myself to say, like, what are my strengths? what are the things I could have done better? What are the things I want to work on? And then how do I express that so that I can get some better outcomes?
It's harder than sometimes people realize to name feelings, because the most common feelings are like, we're limited even in our culture of how many feelings. You feel happy, you feel sad, you feel angry, you feel sleepy, but there's so many more feelings. Like literally my own therapist gave me a feeling chart and I'm like, wow, like I have choices here. And so
Yes, a
that's
lot of
part of that.
choices.
Yes, a lot of choices. And differentiating even between feelings or emotions and body sensations. Our bodies don't lie. I don't care what's coming out your mouth or what you're trying to convince yourself. You know, if your stomach is dropping or your chest is tightening, that's sending you information too about how you're feeling. And so those things need to align. We
Right.
are getting some questions in
Okay,
from the audience, so I'm excited to go there.
great.
I have many more, but let's see. This is from Kendi. Kendi said, what is your vision for the future of this country's mental health systems? And what advice would you offer to emerging professionals who seek to be of service toward it as they find their place in an evolving industry? Great question.
Great
Kendi.
question. Thank you so much. And so, a part of what the American Psychological Association has looked at is, this framework of population health, which basically means there are far more people suffering than the number of people we have in the field, right? So while the one-on-one interventions are good and can be effective for some people, we also have to think outside of the box, to think of like community-based programming, to think about trainings with lay leaders, and also to think, for me, very critically about prevention, right? Especially as a trauma psychologist, it's not enough to just keep helping people in the aftermath. We want to really be intentional about breaking cycles and preventing as much as we can, so that it's not just working for restoration, but we don't want to keep repeating these same patterns. I will also say uh, the needing to greatly diversify the field, that it matters who's in the room. And so at clinics, for example, or even in hospitals, community agencies, counseling centers, there are generally meetings where people, talk about the services they're providing, the clients they're working with, and help each other to come up with some good insights and solutions. And if if the client is from a background and no one in the room has a real understanding and respect for that, they can be misguided, they can be misinformed, and then there can be a lot of ruptures because people can feel they're not totally being seen, accepted, celebrated, their culture interwoven or spirituality honored in a way that feels honoring, that feels right. And so I would say also our current insurance system is very problematic. I know many providers stop accepting because it is a lot of paperwork for very minimal reimbursement and compensation. And so I would say structurally, we need to be open to the new, as opposed to like, this is the way it's been done. Like the system is broken and people are falling through the cracks. And so for those who are doing the work, I would encourage developing new interventions, not just thinking that I have to do it the way it's always been done. I'll just give this one example. I had a student who was assigned to do her internship hours at a high school. And she came up with, based on her own interest, and it was a big hit at the school, but it was like a modeling support group. So like the first half of the 2 hours, they would like practice modeling for like the end of the summer or something, into the school year, they were going to do a fashion show. And in the second hour, they would sit down and it was like a support group. And those kids like signed up for it. People who had been like insecure or isolated were just like strutting and learning how to spin. And then when they would sit down, they would like really open up. So if someone had told me like modeling and therapy, I'm like, like I don't see it, right? So I encourage creativity, innovation, newness, new models and ancient ways, so that we can reach each other.
Shay, thank you.
Yes.
Here's another question from a member of the audience. Could you explain the importance of addressing both the psychological and spiritual aspects of trauma recovery? Great questions
Yes,
coming from the audience
absolutely.
tonight.
Yes, wonderful. So trauma affects us multiple ways. And so, because it has these multiple effects, we want to be tuned into that in our response. So psychologically, we think about people may develop depression, anxiety, panic, post-traumatic stress, addictions. And so as we are PTSD, then in the interventions, we want to think about addressing those symptoms of distress, right? Addressing those diagnoses in a concentrated way. But something that had been less acknowledged previously in the last couple of decades, there's been more written about it, but the potential spiritual effects of trauma. So some people lose their faith. I've had survivors who said, well, I was taught God is love, but then this terrible thing happened. So like, how could both things be true? And often in people's faith communities, they're not allowed to ask those questions because doubt or questions are like frowned upon. And so to be able to, in the therapeutic space, for people to, again, tell their truth, right? Of like, if it rocked my faith or disrupted my faith. And on the other side, some people, it intensified it. Some people started praying more or reading holy texts more or attending services more because they like felt they needed to, that was like a rock or a stabilizing force. Another one I mentioned, of course, was music. So some people are perpetually kind of listening to sacred songs as a way of trying to like soothe their nervous system and their souls. And then while some people lost faith, some people intensified faith, for some people it's a change of faith, right? Where they said, well, like the way I had imagined it is not working for me anymore. So I have to either reimagine who God is, reimagine like myself as a living soul. And so like all of those different aspects are an important part of our reclamation. And a beautiful part is when mental health providers and spiritual leaders can work in collaboration and respect for each other's work and not making people feel like they have to choose, right? Like some people will say, you don't need a therapist, you need to pray. And then some therapists would say, oh, like, why are you praying? You need, you're to double your sessions. So it's a false choice to make people feel like it's one or the other. We want to be holistic. So we want to not require people, and this is the decolonizing, not have to leave a part of yourself at the door. That when I come into this place for my healing, I need to be fully present with the wholeness of myself.
Have you seen therapists and spiritual care providers work together? Have you seen that work?
Yes. So interestingly, a number of churches have opened their own counseling centers, and that they can be run in different ways. Sometimes it is they just allow them to use the space, but because it's on their property, members of that faith community feel more comfortable going because but the people providing it are confidential, are licensed mental health professionals, but it's just like affiliated with the faith community. Another one is where they more do trainings, what they would call like lay people. So it's members of the church perhaps who have gone through a training in order to teach like stress management, or coping with grief or that kind of thing. I recommend that every faith community have a referral list, right? Because sometimes people are coming in and they would, like an encouraging scripture or a prayer, but some people are coming in really needing additional support. And so to be able to make the referral of a places in the community that are no cost or sliding scale or low cost, who are respectful when we think about like culture or faith. So those are some of the ways I've seen it work. A lot of churches, or I keep saying churches, but I want to say, synagogues, temples, even spiritual centers, a lot of them have like health fairs. And I always encourage to not just focus on physical health, but also to have booths on mental health.
Yes.
Because that's an important part.
Yeah, and reducing the stigma of that
Yes.
care is the first barrier that needs to be removed. So just integrating it that way really normalizes it as part of a holistic health.
Yes.
So thank you for that question. The next one is, how do we hold, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here seeing my questions, and I can't figure out how to move it. Just one moment. Okay. How do we hold and process collective and individual rage in the context of the cultural moment? I love that question. And that you name rage, because it's beyond anger. It's beyond, yes.
Right.
How do we do that?
I like to say it is healthy to be outraged about outrageous things. It is healthy to be outraged about outrageous things, and there are outrageous things happening locally, nationally, and globally. And so sometimes we can put on a pedestal people who are detached or numb or disconnected or dissociated. But when you feel it, and so, sometimes I say, like, growing up, I would have been called like a sensitive child, right? You feel things very deeply. I want to say that as challenging as that can be, that's also a gift, right? That your humanity is still showing up, that you believe that people should be treated fairly, with care, with justice. And so when you see otherwise happening, you feel that outrage. And the key becomes, Judith Herman, who wrote the book Trauma and Recovery, talks about the difference between constructive anger and destructive anger, right? So if I'm in such a rage that I'm immobilized and making myself sick, then, of course, that's going to work against me in anything that I want to do. But on the other side, like a constructive outrage, that has been the fuel for any major change that's happened in human history, is people were outraged enough to say, this cannot be, right? This is unacceptable. And so, connecting with like-minded people, working in community and collaboration to do what we can, where we can, with what we can. And I would say training our eyes to see the small steps, because sometimes we can be in such a place of despair that when we can't see any movement, that can put people in a deep, deep depression and hopelessness. And so, like, I see the despair, I am outraged by it, and then I do what I can to shift things, right? I do what I can to try to be a part of the solution.
I guess
And
also, go ahead.
I just was going to say, I also recommend the work of a dear sister friend, Dr. Jennifer Mulan, whose book is Decolonizing Therapy. and she does workshops on sacred rage. So
Yes.
I would encourage that. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to name a similar resource. I worked with Ruth King, who's a licensed clinical social worker and a Buddhist priestess. I'm not sure the title in her faith tradition. It's important to move rage through your body
Yes,
too, because it will eat you up. And so
that's right.
in some of those workshops, they find ways for you to release that energy from your body in a safe place. And then with that, you know, come into the more spiritual, intellectual processing of rage. We have one more question here, and I don't think it's too late to take a few more if something's burning in your heart and mind that you want Dr. Thema to answer. So this question from a member of the audience says, do you have any words of wisdom for aspiring therapists that are Black women still in school and pursuing this field unconventionally? Okay, it just moved. With energetic, spiritual, and ancestral context. You want me to read that again? I felt like I was choppy on that.
Okay. Okay.
Do you have any words of wisdom for aspiring therapists that are Black women still in school, pursuing this field unconventionally? And in parentheses, unconventionally is with energetic, spiritual, and ancestral context. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. You belong here. You are necessary. You are sacred. Do not let them devour you. Do not let them devour you, and know that it is not your job, nor are you being compensated to fix your institution. And it is not your destination. You are passing through. And so do not become burdened with uncompensated labor as a student, especially. So get what you need to get, and whatever it may be lacking in your program, come to trainings like this, outside resources and spaces to nourish yourself and feed yourself, develop community. And I'm going to say both in your department and outside of your department. So you need to connect with local community, and let me backtrack on need, right? Because I'm not the boss of you. You may find it helpful to connect with local community, but you can choose that if you so choose. And I will say not to isolate yourself among your peers. Even if you are the only one or one of few who are Black women, there are people, both faculty and classmates, who can be in solidarity with you. So listen when people speak so you can try to hear their heart, to know that there may be people in that place who are for you, and you want to foster and cultivate those relationships, protect those, because they will help you both personally and academically and professionally. And you're deserving of that. And the last thing I will say is, as Black women, often we have been taught by family, by society, and eventually by ourselves to erase ourselves in service of others, and to know you don't have to always be the strong one, that you need and deserve places where you can unfold, where you can collapse, where you can be real, where you can be tender, where you can be human. You deserve that.
That was a corrective experience for many of us who've already been through school. And I think I'm just going to take a clip from this recording and play it in new student orientation this year. Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. We have quite a few now. This person from the audience says, I struggle to feel beautiful in my overweight body, especially as my relatives tell me I'm unhealthy. They tend to suggest losing weight as a health practice. How do we come home to ourselves when we live in fat bodies that are not welcome in our society? Love that
Mhm.
question.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I want to honor the truth and heartfulness of what you're sharing. And it reminds me of a question and exchange I had with a client when I was talking about us, you know, coming to see our beauty, right, within ourselves. And she asked a very targeted question, which I think is important. She said, Dr. Tamo, what does it matter if I think I'm beautiful if no one else does? Right. That was a painful question. And I think it's important for us to hold space for that so that we don't, and this is a part of decolonizing psychology, liberation psychology, is we don't pretend that it's all in your head, right? It's not just like, oh, you have body image issues and why don't you just love yourself? As you're describing the pain of not just strangers, but people in your family, people who would say they love you, saying and looking at you in ways that are very hurtful and painful. So I want to name that there is not a magic bullet for like, oh, their opinions just don't count. But what I would say, as you are healing your sense of self and redefining your sense of self and beauty, it is going to be important to develop and choose an inner circle of people who really see you, right? Because we didn't get to choose our family, right? That's they are who they are, and they think based on their conditioning, um, and that's how it's coming out. So you can set some limits or boundaries, because if every time you're in their presence, it's breaking your spirit, then you want to think about uh, how much time or what kind of time, and do I want to give them? And is there any variation? Like, are they all on this same theme? Or it's like two mean aunts, right? And like everybody else is quiet. Because it is important to distinguish. Sometimes the loudest people become the voice of the family, and maybe not everybody's in agreement. So you want to determine, are there people who feel more safe or supportive in this family that I have? And then in terms of my chosen family or chosen friends, choosing people with whom I feel better about myself and with whom I feel nourished, with whom I feel celebrated. And then I would also say it makes a difference, your medical team. Uh, do I have a physician who is focused on my health and wellness, not just in terms of what the scale says, but my holistic health and wellness, right? Because they're in a position of authority. And when they have that understanding, it helps you to feel supported and affirmed in your desire to be healthy, recognizing that like how that is defined is very different, can be very different than how my family is looking at it. And the last thing I'll say is Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Monologues, she talks about it's a radical revolutionary act for a woman in this country to look in the mirror and say, I love myself. And she said, most of us, when we're looking, we don't fully believe it, but we continue to repeat it. And as you repeat it, you can grow into it. You can uh, learn to embrace the fullness of your full body self. And the last thing I will say is sometimes you need a change of environment, because there are places where how you look right now is quite celebrated. And so sometimes you need to be in a different environment where people really see the beauty and the glory of who you are.
Such a beautiful question and answer. I think we're going to squeeze one more in here. Oh, this is a good one. What self-care practices do you personally find most effective in reclaiming your own self?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you
So,
doing over there? Talking in the mirror? What?
yeah. So
Mhm.
one, I will say I love dancing. I love African dance and I love sacred dance. And also because since I teach and facilitate therapy, I spend a lot of times being still, like sitting in this chair or standing in front of a class. And so reclaiming my body in dance and movement um, is very liberating for me. And the second one that I will mention um, is uh, my sacred practice in the morning. And so I encourage people to develop a ritual of whatever you would like to do to nourish yourself before you go out in the day so that we are not so fragile or empty, but that I show up with my cup full and then I can work or do or interact from my overflow. So I'm not showing up like on my last nerve. Like you've heard people say, "Are you getting on my last nerve?" So no, no, no. I want, my nervous system to be fully nourished. And so I do that for me, whether that's with music or with prayer or in community or in walking in nature, whatever, writing poetry, uh, have a morning ritual that feeds you so that you're not going into the world empty.
Mhm. That's wisdom. Thank
Mm.
you for that question. And I think that is our last question. I'm going to give you the final word. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't asked you about or that's arising in your heart?
Yes, I want to say that reclaiming yourself is a journey with detours and imperfections. And so, not to judge yourself harshly, to give yourself grace and compassion. Sometimes, when people see persons like me or you, they can assume like we always get it right? Or always have the answers, or have always like lined everything up just so. And that is far from the truth.
Mm.
Uh, that, it's a growing process, and I pull the wisdom out of my wounds and keep letting myself evolve and grow. And so when you stumble, don't quit. When you stumble, give yourself a breather and then continue on your journey. You're worth the journey.
Thank you, Dr. Thema, for being here with this online community tonight. You certainly have brought a healing upon us, and thank you for the dedication to the work. Keep writing, keep telling those stories for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone in the audience.